You think you know someone, right? I mean, after years of marriage, kids, the whole 9 yards. But then, one little DNA kit turned my world upside down. Her birthday was coming up, and I thought, hey, let's do something fun, something different. So, I got us those ancestry kits. You know, trace your roots, see if you're secretly a Viking or something. She seemed off about it, hesitant, but she did it, swabbed her cheek, sent it off. Just a bit of fun, I thought. Then the results came. It was supposed to be a revelation about her family tree, but it turned out to be about ours. There I was, staring at a screen that might as well have been a sledgehammer to my life. None of the kids, not one of them, was mine. The blood drained from my face, my heart pounded like it wanted out. I mean, how does this happen? 3 kids, and none of them mine? So, I dug deeper, because once you fall down that rabbit hole, you can't stop. The more I found, the worse it got. Each kid had a different dad. Imagine that. My life, my family, it was a lie. A show put on by the one person I trusted most. Anger, yeah, there was plenty of that. But it was more than that. It was this cold, sinking feeling that I'd been played for a fool. So, I did what any sane person would do when they feel cornered and betrayed. I hired a private investigator. If she was lying about this, what else was there? The pie, a guy who looked like he chewed nails for breakfast, got to work. And what he found, it wasn't pretty. My wife, the mother of my kids, had a string of affairs stretching back years. Photos, messages, the kind of proof that you can't just explain away. Sitting there in my living room, with my whole marriage scattered around me in photos and papers, I realized something. I'd been living in a fantasy, thinking I had a family, a loving wife. But it was all smoke and mirrors. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. This was about my life, my identity. Who was I, if not the husband, the father I thought I was? That's when the idea started forming, a dark seed in the pit of my stomach. If my life was going to fall apart, I wasn't going down alone. She had to pay for this, for the years she stole from me, the lies, the deceit. I know what you're thinking. Revenge is a road that goes nowhere good. But at that moment, it was the only road I could see. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. I'd always thought that was just a fancy line from a movie, but there I was, planning my own cold dish. It started with the money. You see, if things went south, I didn't want to be left with empty pockets. So, I began moving my assets, bit by bit, nothing too obvious, just enough to secure my future. Then, I turned my attention to her, to the woman who made a fool out of me. It wasn't about grand gestures of revenge, no. It was the little things, small enough to make her question her own mind. I'd move her keys, switch off the alarm she'd set, hide that novel she was reading. It sounds petty, but you see, it's the little things that get under your skin. But the real game changer was when I sent those DNA results to the biological fathers. Anonymous, of course. I wanted to see her world crumble, piece by piece. And it did. First, there was the wealthy businessman, the real father of our oldest. He showed up one day, out of the blue, demanding answers. I watched from a distance as they argued in the driveway, her face white as a sheet. That was just the beginning. Her fortress started to fall apart. I could see the cracks appearing, the doubt, the fear. It was in the way she looked over her shoulder, the way her voice shook on the phone. I'd planted the seeds, and now I was watching them grow. And then, there was the isolation. Friends, family, I made sure the rumors reached them all. Whispers of affairs, of lies, of things no one wants to hear about a loved one. One by one, they started to distance themselves from her. She was toxic, and they didn't want to get poisoned. Watching her like this, you'd think I'd feel triumphant, powerful even. But the truth? It was emptier than I'd expected. Each step of my plan, each little victory, it didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, there was this hollow feeling, like I was carving out pieces of myself along with her. But I couldn't stop, not after coming this far. I had to see it through, had to make her feel just a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. It was no longer just about revenge, it was a lesson, a punishment for her betrayal. So, I kept at it, watching as the life we'd built together, the life she'd lied about, fell apart around her. And as I stood there, in the shadows of our crumbling world, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal old wounds, it just cuts new ones. The plot thickens, right? There I was, setting the stage for the grand finale of a marriage that was nothing but a sham. I went a step further, a step darker. I planted evidence to make it look like she was mixed up in some shady business. It wasn't hard to do. A few forged documents, an anonymous tip to the cops, and the stage was set. I watched from the shadows as the police handcuffed her. She was confused, scared, emotions I'd become all too familiar with. But things don't always go as planned. She was released, no solid evidence to hold her. Still, the seed of doubt was planted, not just in her mind but in the eyes of everyone who knew her. The whispers started, the sideways glances, she was tainted, even if she was innocent of this particular crime. And then, she began to suspect. She knew someone was orchestrating her downfall, but she couldn't put the pieces together. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But every time that feeling crept up, I remembered the lies, the betrayal. The divorce papers were the next act. I filed, citing her infidelity. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, signing those papers, admitting to the world that my marriage was a lie. But it was necessary, a part of the plan. The proceedings were brutal, every affair, every lie was dragged into the light. I watched as her face crumbled, not just from guilt but from the realization that it was me pulling the strings. She tried to reconcile after that, said she was sorry, that she'd change. But it was too late for sorry. My heart had turned to stone. I looked her in the eye and told her it was over. No emotion, just cold, hard finality. The custody battle was a massacre. The biological fathers stepped in, and with the evidence of her affairs, her instability, it was an open and shut case. She lost the kids, the only innocent victims in this twisted game. But the real blow came when she realized it was me. The man she'd married, the father to her children, the one she'd betrayed, I was her nemesis. The look in her eyes, that mix of bewilderment and betrayal, it was a punch to the gut. But I couldn't let myself feel. Feelings were what got me into this mess. In the end, she was left with nothing. No husband, no kids, no friends. Her world, once filled with lies and deceit, was now just an empty shell. Looking back, I wonder if it was worth it. The satisfaction of seeing her brought to justice was overshadowed by the emptiness of my own victory. I'd won the battle, but at what cost? My family was broken, my heart was cold, and the future was a bleak, unknown path. But I couldn't dwell on that. This was the path I'd chosen, driven by a need for justice, for retribution. And now, I had to live with it. You ever hear the saying, be careful what you wish for? Well, I got exactly what I wished for, and let me tell you, it's not all it's cracked up to be. There she was, my once loving wife, scraping the bottom of the barrel. My plan had worked a little too well. She was broke, thanks to the divorce settlement I had meticulously engineered to leave her with next to nothing. Her reputation? In tatters. The rumors I'd spread, the half-truths and full lies had done their job. She was poison to anyone who knew her name. Jobs? No one would hire her. I saw her, going from one interview to another, hope flickering in her eyes, only to be snuffed out time and again. Then came the desperation. I watched from the shadows as she reached out to her past lovers, the ones she thought would save her. But they turned their backs, one after another. They wanted nothing to do with the woman who had lied to them as much as she had to me. It wasn't long before the threatening messages started. Anonymous, of course. I didn't send them, but I didn't stop them either. Fear became her constant companion, and I watched, part of me satisfied, part of me horrified at what I had become. The day she got evicted from her house, that was a turning point. She stood there on the curb, her life stuffed into a few boxes and bags, the home we had shared, where our kids had grown, now just a building with locked doors to her. It was a sight that would break most men, but I was past breaking. I was the architect of her downfall, and there was no turning back. I kept tabs on her, following her descent into a life I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. She moved into a dingy motel, the kind of place you wouldn't want to spend a night in. There, in that small, grim room, the magnitude of what I had done hit me. I had wanted to make her pay, to feel the pain and betrayal I had felt. But this? This was something else. This was not just a woman scorned. This was a life destroyed. And the worst part? I was the one who had destroyed it. Sure, she had cheated, lied, torn our family apart. But as I watched her in that motel room, I couldn't help but feel that I had gone too far. Revenge, it turns out, is a double-edged sword. It cuts your enemy, sure, but it cuts you too, deep into the bone. I realized then that this was no longer about her or what she had done. It was about me, about what I had become in my quest for vengeance. I had lost sight of who I was, of what mattered. I was no hero in this story. I was just another villain. So there we were, both of us lost in our own ways, both of us paying the price for our actions. Her, living in a rundown motel, and me, watching from a distance, a spectator to the tragedy I had authored. It was a bitter lesson, but one I had to learn the hard way. Revenge doesn't heal old wounds, it just opens new ones. Life's funny, you know? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. There she was, my wife, living in some rundown motel, the kind of place where hope goes to die. She was scraping by, a shadow of the woman she used to be. And me? I was watching from a distance, feeling this hollow satisfaction. I had one, but that tasted like ash. Then, out of the blue, this guy shows up. Someone from her past, a blast from the life she had before me. He was slick, the kind of guy you don't trust at first glance. But she was desperate, drowning, and he was offering a lifeline. She took it, of course. What choice did she have? This guy, he wasn't just an old flame. He was trouble with a capital T, I could see it, but she was too far gone, too lost in her own mess to notice. He started pulling her into his world, a world of quick fixes and shady deals. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. He had her wrapped around his finger, manipulating her into doing things, illegal things, for a quick buck. It was all about the money for him. And her? She was just a pawn in his game. I found out about it, the whole sordid affair. Part of me wanted to step in, to save her from herself. But another part of me, the part that was still burning with betrayal and anger, wanted to let it play out. So, I did nothing. I just watched as she spiraled further down the rabbit hole. Before long, she was involved in some high-risk scheme cooked up by this guy. It was bad news, the kind of thing that gets you in deep trouble with the wrong kind of people. She was in over her head, playing a dangerous game with no idea of the rules. I remember thinking, this is it. She's finally hit rock bottom. It was a mix of pity and relief. Pity for the woman I once loved, who was now caught in a web of her own making. And relief that it wasn't my problem anymore. But even then, deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. You don't just walk away from a life you've shared with someone, not completely. The memories, the good times, they have a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. So, there I was, caught between my desire for revenge and the remnants of the love I once felt for her. It was a tough spot, watching someone you once cared about destroying themselves. But I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. In the end, life isn't black and white. It's a million shades of gray, and sometimes, you find yourself lost in the shadows, wondering how you got there and where you go next. Life's a gamble, they say. You roll the dice, take your chances. But what happens when every roll comes up snake eyes? That's where she was, my wife, caught in a losing streak that just wouldn't quit. The scheme, her big shot at redemption, it blew up in her face. Big time. There she was, mixed up in something that had danger written all over it. And, as luck would have it, it all went south. She managed to get out, but it was a close call. Too close. Now, she was on the run, a fugitive with the law snapping at her heels. It was like something out of a bad movie, except it was real, and she was the star. Me? I heard about her mess, of course. It was all over town, the whispers, the rumors. Part of me thought I should feel something, guilt, maybe, or even a twinge of concern. But there was nothing. Just a numb indifference. I'd checked out, emotionally packed my bags, and left the building. She tried to reach out to the kids, a desperate move from a desperate woman. But they wanted none of it. They'd heard the stories, seen the evidence. To them, she was a stranger, a ghost from a past they wanted to forget. It was harsh, but that's how it was. You reap what you sow. There she was, all alone, with nowhere to turn. I heard she was thinking of turning herself in, making a clean breast of it. Maybe she thought it would be a fresh start, a way to wipe the slate clean. But fate, it seems, had other ideas. Before she could make her move, they got to her. The people she'd crossed, the ones she'd wronged in that failed scheme. They weren't the forgiving type. No, they were out for blood, and she was their target. The news of her capture reached me, like whispers through the grapevine. Did I consider stepping in? Playing the hero? Saving her from the mess she'd made? The thought crossed my mind, but it was a fleeting one. I was done, out of the game. This was her fight, not mine. So, I did nothing. I stayed out of it, let the chips fall where they may. Some would call it cold, heartless even. But when you've been burned as bad as I had, the heat just doesn't touch you anymore. There was a time when I would have done anything for her, moved heaven and earth to make her happy. But that time was gone, a distant memory faded by lies and betrayal. I was a different man now, hardened, cynical. In the end, it was a sad state of affairs. She was out there, alone, facing the consequences of her actions, and I was here, living a life that no longer had her in it. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the person you once shared everything with was now a stranger, a ghost haunting the edges of your life. But that's life, isn't it? Unpredictable, unforgiving, a game of chance where sometimes you lose more than you bargained for. Ever heard the phrase, when it rains, it pours? Well, for her, it was a never-ending storm. There she was, finally out of the clutches of those she'd wronged, but what was left? Her life, once a picture-perfect postcard, was now just a tattered, faded photograph. Ruined. She was free, sure, but it was the freedom of a bird with broken wings. She was haunted, you know? Not by ghosts or anything like that, but by her own past. Everywhere she looked, she saw shadows of the mistakes she'd made. Paranoia became her constant companion, a nagging whisper in her ear that wouldn't quiet down. It was a sad sight, seeing someone who used to be so full of life now jumping at shadows. And me? I was putting the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. The divorce papers, once just a threat, were now a reality. Signing them felt surreal, like I was signing off a part of my life, a chapter that was closing forever. It was done. The ties that bound us, the promises we made, all severed with a few strokes of a pen. But life goes on, right? You can't just stop living, even when your world's turned upside down. So, I found solace where I could, in my work, in the little things that made up my day-to-day life. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. It's funny how life works. One day you're married, you've got a family, a plan. The next, you're single, starting over, the past just a memory. But it's not just about moving on, it's about finding peace. Peace with what happened, peace with yourself. She tried to start over too, but it wasn't easy. The past has a way of clinging to you, like a stubborn stain that just won't wash out. She struggled, fought to find her footing in a world that seemed to have turned its back on her. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her, about what she was going through. But it was like thinking about someone from another life, a distant, faded echo of a time that was gone. I had my path, she had hers. Our roads had diverged, and there was no turning back. In the end, I found a kind of peace, a quiet acceptance of how things turned out. I threw myself into my work, found joy in the little things. A good cup of coffee, a quiet evening, the satisfaction of a job well done. It was a simple life, but it was mine. She, on the other hand, was still searching, still trying to find her way out of the labyrinth of her own making. It's not easy, starting over when you're carrying the weight of your past on your shoulders. But that's the thing about life, it goes on, whether you're ready for it or not. So, there we were, two people who once shared everything, now living worlds apart. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes that's just how the story goes. Starting over. Sounds simple, right? Just a matter of picking yourself up, dusting off, and stepping into a new day. But for her, it was like climbing a mountain with no peak in sight. She tried, God knows she did. Tried to leave the past behind, to carve out a new path for herself. But the past, it's like a shadow that never quite leaves you alone. She was a pariah, shunned by on her. Finding a job? That was a joke. Even the most menial tasks were denied to her, her reputation preceding her like a bad smell. And her health, it wasn't holding up either. Stress, they say, can break you down, and it was doing a number on her. The once vibrant, lively woman I knew was fading, wilting under the weight of her new reality. Then came the bombshell, the cruel twist of fate that would break her once and for all. She found out, somehow, someway, she learned that it was me pulling the strings, that I was the architect of her downfall. The look in her eyes when she confronted me, it was something I'll never forget. Betrayal, pain, a deep, unspoken sorrow. It was like looking into the eyes of someone who's lost everything. That confrontation, it was the last time I saw her. She was broken, a shell of the woman she once was. There was no fight left in her, no fiery comeback or vengeful plot. Just a deep, overwhelming sense of defeat. As for me, I thought I'd feel victorious, knowing that she finally understood the extent of my revenge. But victory? That feeling never came. Instead, there was this hollow emptiness, a realization that in my quest to bring her down, I'd lost a part of myself too. The last I heard, she was living on the fringes, a ghost wandering through a life that had slipped through her fingers. Her choices, her actions, they had led her here, but I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt, a sense of responsibility for the path she was on. Life has a way of teaching you lessons you didn't know you needed to learn. I thought revenge would bring closure, but all it brought was more pain, more regret. Looking back, I wonder if things could have been different, if there was a path we could have taken that wouldn't have led us here. But wondering, wishing, it doesn't change the past. It doesn't heal the wounds we've inflicted on each other. We were both casualties in a war that neither of us won, a war that left us both broken in our own ways. In the end, this isn't a story of triumph or redemption. It's a tale of loss, of love gone wrong, and the price we pay for the choices we make. It's about the scars that we carry, the memories that haunt us, and the hard truth that sometimes, there's no such thing as a So, let me tell you about the craziest, most whirlwind time of my life. It all started the day I met her. I was at this dive bar with some buddies, just looking to blow off steam after a hellish week at work. Then, bam, there she was, laughing at something on her phone, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. Her laugh, man, it was like this melody that just cut through all the noise. I knew I had to talk to her. So, I did what any slightly buzzed, totally smitten guy would do. I walked right up and said something so forgettable I can't even remember it now. But she smiled, and just like that, every crappy thing from the week just melted away. Fast forward through months of what can only be described as the kind of romance you see in those cheesy but addictive movies. We were inseparable, every moment felt like it was straight out of a dream. We moved quick, sure, but when you know, you know. Right? Then came the day we decided to buy a house. I remember walking through what would eventually be our home, talking about paint colors. She was so excited, envisioning our future in every room, and there was this gleam in her eye that made me believe we could do anything together. We signed those papers feeling like we were on top of the world. But the universe has a way of testing you, you know? We wanted to start a family immediately. Turned out, it wasn't that easy for us. Month after month, nothing. Each failed attempt was a hit we took together, but it hurt like hell. We tried to keep each other positive, but those were some dark days, no doubt about it. The silence in our home started to feel heavy, filled with all the words we couldn't bring ourselves to say. Then, one day, everything changed. She came into the living room holding a pregnancy test, and before she even said anything, I knew. The way she was biting her lip to keep from smiling too wide gave it away. Man, the relief and joy in that moment were something else. It felt like we were finally breathing again after being underwater for so long. If you told me years ago that I'd be this guy, sacrificing every little thing for his family, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, and honestly, I wouldn't change it for the world. There were nights, so many nights, when our little one just wouldn't stop crying. Colic, the doctor said, like that word was supposed to explain the endless hours of screaming that pierced right through you. I walked miles in our living room, bouncing and shushing, trying everything. My wife, she was amazing through it all, but exhaustion takes its toll. So, I took the night shifts, letting her catch some sleep. Work in the morning was a haze, running on fumes, but seeing her rest for even just a couple of hours made it worth it. And money, man, daycare costs are no joke. I picked up extra shifts wherever I could, sometimes juggling 2, even 3 different jobs. My old guitar started collecting dust in the corner, and nights out with the guys became a memory. But every sacrifice felt right, necessary even, when I came home to see the smiles on their faces, hear the laughter in our home. I've gotta say, though, nothing beats the pride I feel when I talk about my wife. She's always had this passion for art, painting, drawing, you name it. When things got a bit more stable financially, she dove back into it, creating these incredible pieces. I brag about her every chance I get. You should see what she made this time, I tell anyone who'd listen. Her happiness, her fulfillment, it's like a direct line to my own. The house, our home, became another canvas for my devotion. The kitchen renovation was a beast. She loves to cook, see, and the old kitchen was just too dark. I spent nights after the kids went to bed and weekends I didn't even know I had, tearing out cabinets, laying new tiles, installing brighter lights. The look on her face when it was finally done, that made every splinter, every curse word under my breath, worth it. Then there was the playset. Our backyard wasn't much to speak of, but I had this vision, you know? A fortress for our little ones, a place for adventures. I'm no carpenter, but I learned on the go, YouTube tutorials and hardware store guys becoming my new best friends. When it was finished, watching our kids play on it, claiming it as their kingdom, I knew I'd given them something special, a piece of their childhood they'd always remember. Things started to get a bit off. I mean, you put in all this effort, right? Trying to make things perfect, or as close to it as you can get. But it's like, suddenly, it's not hitting the mark anymore. My wife, she used to love my surprise dinners, used to rave about the little things I'd fix or build around the house. Lately, though, it's been different. Meals go untouched. She barely glances at the new shelves I put up in the living room. It's like I'm missing a step somewhere, but for the life of me, I can't figure out where. Then there's our anniversary. I had it all planned out, nothing fancy, just a quiet night in, her favorite movie, the good takeout from that place she loves. And she bails on me. Girls' night, she says, and the way she says it, it's like she's not even sorry. That hurt, not gonna lie. It's like these little punches to the gut, you know? And those late nights at work started piling up. First, it was just an hour or two, but then it turned into whole evenings. Business trips, too, out of nowhere, and when I'd ask about them, it's all vague answers and quick subject changes. One night she comes home, and there's this smell clinging to her, some perfume I've never smelled before. It's not hers, that's for damn sure. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was being paranoid, but it's like this little alarm bell in the back of my head just wouldn't shut up. My buddy Mike, we've been tight since high school, he's the one who finally said something. We were grabbing a beer, and he's dancing around the subject, clearly uncomfortable. Then he just comes out with it, says he saw my wife downtown with some guy. He's quick to add it might have been nothing, but the way he said it, I knew he was worried. I laughed it off, told him he was seeing things, but inside? Man, inside I was a mess. That seed of doubt Mike planted, it started sprouting, growing, taking root. I kept telling myself there had to be a good explanation. People don't just change overnight, right? There's always a reason. So, I started paying more attention, looking for signs, any indication of what was really going on. The more I saw, the less I understood. It was like living with a stranger. Those doubts Mike mentioned, they weren't just in my head anymore. They were real, tangible, and no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't just brush them off. It's one thing to suspect, another to know. I was caught between wanting the truth and being terrified of what that truth might be. So yeah, things got complicated, fast. And the more I tried to ignore it, the bigger it got, until ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. Remember how I said things were a bit off? Well, it didn't stop there. It's like, one day, everything's normal, and then suddenly, you're living in some weird alternate reality where nothing makes sense. My wife, she started spending a lot of time with this new coworker. Said she was just helping her out, you know, a single mom struggling to keep things together. I got it, I really did. Helping people is good, and that's one of the things I love about her. But it was like this woman became the center of her universe. Constant texting, even when we were supposed to be having family time. I'd catch her smiling at her phone like it contained some kind of secret only she was in on. So, I brought it up one night, trying to be as non-confrontational as possible. I said something like, "Hey, seems like you're really invested in your new friend, everything cool?" And man, the way she flipped it on me. Suddenly, I'm the bad guy, controlling and mentioning it. It's like she had an answer ready, turning my concern into an attack on her character. That conversation left me feeling like I was the one losing it, questioning my grip on reality. And that's when the emotional toll kicked in. I couldn't sleep, just lying there, running that conversation and 100 others through my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I started snapping at the kids for the smallest things, stuff I'd usually laugh off. They didn't deserve that, they were just being kids, and here I was, turning into this grouchy monster I didn't even recognize. Then there was the home project, this big, joyful thing I'd started when things were good. It was supposed to be this amazing surprise, a testament to our family and the love we shared. But now it sat there, half-finished, a glaring metaphor for our crumbling relationship. Every time I looked at it, it just reminded me of better times, making it even harder to muster the energy to complete it. The whole situation felt like I was drowning, struggling to reach the surface, but every move I made just pulled me deeper. It was like living with a stranger, one who knew exactly what to say to twist the knife a little more each day. The woman I married, the one I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. The gap between us grew wider with every passing day, filled with silence, unspoken accusations, and the heavy weight of a love that was slowly dying. You know how they say desperate times call for desperate measures? Yeah, well, I hit that point. Sleepless nights and endless doubts drove me to do something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Just typing that out feels surreal, like I'm talking about someone else's life. But it was me, sitting in a dimly lit office, feeling like a character in a bad detective novel, explaining why I needed someone to follow my wife. The day I got the results was a day I'll never forget. The PI handed me this manila envelope, and my hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, photos, too many photos, there she was, with someone I knew all too well. My stomach knotted up as the reality of it all sank in. It wasn't just anyone she was spending all this time with, it was my best friend's wife. The betrayal, man, it cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. Our families were close, we did everything together. And here they were, behind our backs, tearing everything apart. Confrontation was inevitable. I couldn't just sit on this, let it eat away at me. So, I waited for her to come home one evening, and the moment she walked in, I just lost it. The photos, the evidence of her lies, I threw them at her. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. First, the shock, then the lies trying to take shape, but eventually, they just crumbled into this cold defiance. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The fight that followed was brutal. Not physically, but emotionally, it was a war zone. Every hurt, every suspicion, every moment of doubt, it all came pouring out. And her? She didn't even deny it, not really. It was like once the initial shock wore off, she just accepted it, and that acceptance? It was like a knife twisting in my gut. The worst part, though, was dealing with the betrayal from someone I considered family. My best friend, his wife, our intertwined lives, it was all a lie. How do you even begin to process that? The families you thought would be together forever, now torn apart by deceit and infidelity. It was a mess, a complete and utter mess. And sitting there, amidst the wreckage of my marriage, I couldn't help but wonder how it all came to this. How did we get from being so in love to this absolute disaster? Everything after that felt like moving through a fog. The days blended into one another, each as heavy as the last. I was going through the motions, trying to figure out what came next, not just for me, but for our kids, our families, our friends. The fallout was catastrophic, affecting not just us but everyone around us. And through it all, I kept going back to those early days, wondering how we ever got from there to here. It was a long, painful journey from love to betrayal, and one I never saw coming. After everything blew up, the world seemed to slow down, almost like it was holding its breath. The fallout was a nightmare. Imagine waking up every day to a reality you wish was just a bad dream. That was my life. My kids, man, they took it hard. Confused, scared, not really understanding why mommy and daddy were suddenly at war. They started clinging to me like I was their lifeline, every night sneaking into my bed, looking for some sense of security in a world that just turned upside down. It broke me, seeing them like that, knowing I couldn't just wave a magic wand and make everything okay again. I'm not the kind of guy who easily asks for help. Pride, stubbornness, call it what you will. But I was drowning, and I knew it. So, I reached out to the one person I hadn't talked to in ages, my brother. We weren't estranged or anything dramatic like that. Life just got in the way, you know? The call was awkward at first, stumbling over words, the weight of unspoken years heavy between us. But when I finally managed to spit it out, the floodgates opened. He listened, really listened, and by the end of it, offered me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Unconditional support. It was a relief, like someone had just thrown me a lifeline. Then there were my in-laws. That was a whole different kind of hell. You'd think, given the situation, there might be some semblance of neutrality. Nope. It was cold fury all the way, and it was directed at me. They took her side, no questions asked. It was like all the years we spent as family, the holidays, the birthdays, they meant nothing. I was the villain in their story, end of discussion. That hurt, more than I expected it would. It wasn't just the loss of my wife, it felt like I was being cut off from a part of my life that I had come to cherish. Navigating this new reality was like walking through a minefield. Every step, every decision, was fraught with potential disaster. But with my brother's support, I started to find my footing. It wasn't easy, and there were days I thought I couldn't go on. But I did, for my kids, for myself. I had to rebuild, had to show them that even when life knocks you down, you get back up, you keep going. The whole ordeal was a lesson in humility, in the importance of family, and in the often painful reality of love and loss. It was a chapter of my life I never saw coming, one that tested me in ways I never imagined. But through it all, I found strength I didn't know I had, and a resilience that surprised even me. Life, as they say, goes on. And so did we, one step at a time, into a future uncertain but faced together. There's a moment, a turning point, when you realize that playing the nice guy just isn't going to cut it anymore. That moment for me came crashing down with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. It was time to lawyer up, to find someone who could navigate the stormy waters of a divorce that was getting uglier by the minute. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, it was about protecting my kids, safeguarding what little of my sanity remained. So, I found the most ruthless divorce attorney in town. The kind of guy whose name made people wince. It felt like declaring war, but what choice did I have? Digging through the financial records was like opening Pandora's box. Every statement, every receipt was a revelation of deceit. While I was pinching pennies, lying awake at night worrying about bills, she was living it up. Those art supplies she needed? Turns out they were just cover for lavish trips and extravagant spending sprees. Every discovery felt like a betrayal, the financial infidelity somehow stinging just as sharply as the emotional kind. And then there was the social fallout. Man, that hit hard. Mutual friends, people I'd considered family, were suddenly picking sides. It's one thing to go through a personal crisis, but it's another to realize that private agony is now public spectacle. Whispers at the kids' school, once friendly faces now either awash with pity or looking away in judgment. It's like we've become the latest gossip, our pain a source of entertainment for others. It's weird, you know? You live your life thinking you're part of a community, believing in the bonds you've built. But when the chips are down, you see things for what they really are. Some friends stood by me, true, but others? Well, let's just say I learned a lot about people during that time. The whole experience was isolating, the loneliness compounded by the realization that those I thought had my back were actually on the sidelines, watching the spectacle unfold. Facing the lawyer, uncovering the secrets, dealing with the social backlash, it was like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Every step was fraught with danger, the potential for new explosions lurking with every piece of uncovered truth. But amidst the chaos, there was a strange sense of clarity. The illusions of my former life were stripped away, revealing a stark landscape that I now had to navigate. It was daunting, sure, but there was also a sense of liberation in facing the reality head-on. The battle lines were drawn, and while I never wanted this war, I was now fully engaged. It was about more than just ending a marriage, it was about fighting for a future, for my kids, for the chance to rebuild from the ashes. And as daunting as that prospect was, there was also a flicker of hope. Because sometimes, it's only when everything falls apart that you find the strength to start putting the pieces back together. In a twist I never saw coming, she reached out to me, my best friend's ex, the other victim in this twisted saga of betrayal. Honestly, I was hesitant at first. What more was there to say? But there was something in her voice that resonated with me, a shared pain that needed voicing, maybe even a shared need for closure. So, we met, two betrayed souls seeking answers in a sea of lies. The conversation was raw, emotions stripped bare. We weren't looking for revenge, just some semblance of understanding, a way to make sense of the senseless. It was cathartic, in a way, acknowledging our shared ordeal, validating our pain. The kids, though, they were my main concern. They had questions, so many questions. Why isn't mommy living with us anymore? When is she coming back? How do you answer that without shattering their world? I did my best to protect their innocence, to explain things in a way that wouldn't leave scars. But every question was a dagger, a reminder of the fractures in our family that might never fully heal. Then, there was that night. The night when the weight of it all just crushed me. I was alone, the kids asleep, and the silence was deafening. I found myself in front of our wedding photo, and the dam just broke. I sobbed, cursed at the smiling faces in the picture that seemed to mock my current misery. Doubts crept in, gnawing at me. Was I good enough? Could I have done something differently? It was my lowest point, a moment of utter despair. But life has a way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. The custody battle was brutal. Accusations flew, aimed to wound, to discredit. She played dirty, using tactics I couldn't believe the person I once loved would stoop to. Parental alienation, false accusations, it was a nightmare. There were moments I thought I'd lose everything, moments when hope was just a flicker, nearly extinguished by the relentless onslaught. Then came my unexpected ally, my sister. Always quiet, always in the background, suddenly she was my rock. She stepped up in ways I couldn't have imagined, taking on childcare, diving into legal research, uncovering loopholes I didn't know existed. Her support was unwavering, her resolve steel. Without her, I don't know how I would have made it through. The courtroom reveal was like living the betrayal all over again, but publicly, painfully. Every lie, every deceitful act was laid bare for all to see. It was humiliating, yes, but it also steeled my resolve. I had to fight, not just for me, but for my kids, for the truth. Justice, when it came, was a bittersweet victory. I secured primary custody, a financial penalty against my ex, and a restraining order against the man I once considered a brother. It wasn't fully satisfying, but it was something, a foundation to start rebuilding on. The aftermath was a strange mix of emptiness and resolve. The house felt different, quieter, but there was also a sense of determination in the air. Every task, every chore, became a step towards something new, a future built just for me and my kids. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges and healing, but also possibilities. It was a chance to rediscover who we were, to find strength in the ruins, and maybe, just maybe, to start dreaming of a better. The cops told me to sit down, that they needed a statement. I couldn't focus on anything but the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt like an hour with her gone. We understand this is difficult, sir, some lady officer said. But we need to know exactly what happened. What happened, that's the thing. What the hell did happen? 1 minute everything was normal. Well, okay, normalish. We'd had our fights lately, that's for sure. But it started out so perfect. Remember when we bought our house? God, she was so excited she practically skipped from room to room. We can paint this one blue. She laughed, her eyes practically sparkling. That smile of hers. That's the thing that got me in the first place. Stress at work, bad mood, didn't matter. That smile could melt all of it away. Then we tried for a baby. That wasn't so easy. Doctors, appointments, waiting. Month after month, those damn negative tests. I could see the life drain out of her a little each time. Finally, it happened, and man, her smile then, it could have outshone the sun. But after, things got complicated. She'd get mad over nothing, snap at me if dinner wasn't perfect or I tracked a bit of dirt in from the garage. I tried to brush it off, thinking hormones or stress or something. But then the yelling started. Sometimes over nothing, sometimes I deserved it, I guess. Yesterday, she came up with this plan. I swear, the look in her eye, it didn't feel right. But I always tried to keep her happy, you know? We need money, she'd said, her voice hard. More money. I told her I couldn't just conjure up extra cash. She didn't like that. She told me to wait, that she had it figured out. Then she just left, didn't say where. I paced the house, feeling jumpy, a bad feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. I texted her a few times, no answer. The news came on, that's when I knew something was way wrong. They were talking about a robbery, same area, about the same time she went out. When the cops showed up, well, that's when everything spiraled out of control. Now here I am, stuck in this room, and they're asking if I knew about it. I want to say no, of course not, but, the truth is, part of me wonders if that crazy look in her eyes, that tension, what if she really was capable of this? My whole body was buzzing, like I downed 5 coffees instead of just one. The cops just kept asking questions. They seemed fixated on whether I knew about, well, whatever it was she'd done. I just wanted to go home, check if she was back, if everything would somehow go back to normal. Didn't they get that this wasn't me? This wasn't us. Look, I'm not the type to brag about stuff, but damn it, I tried. Those long nights where the baby wouldn't stop screaming and I was up at the crack of dawn for work? That was me, pulling extra shifts so we could afford that fancy daycare. Me again, my old buddies asking me out for a beer? Nah, couldn't do it. Had to be a good husband, a good dad. Had to put them first. And it was worth it, for a while. Seeing her face light up when I brought home that expensive easel for her paintings, or watching the kids go wild on the swing set I built. That was enough. That was the payoff. Remember that kitchen remodel? The one where she picked out all those fancy tiles and that stupid farmhouse sink? Hell yeah, I worked my ass off on that, even after my back ached and my hands were blistered. Worth it to hear her humming happily while she cooked up one of her fancy dinners. I might not get the whole art thing, but I got that making her happy made me happy. Then it changed. That spark. It started flickering. The smiles got fewer, the complaints got louder. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong. Like that one Saturday, I finally tried to squeeze in a round of golf. Just one lousy morning, and when I got back. Man, she laid into me like I'd never seen. Screaming that I never cared, that I was selfish. Okay. Maybe I snapped back, maybe we both said things we didn't mean. But hell, the next thing you know, she's coming up with this scheme of hers, saying it's our only way out. I finally got home after another day at the station. God, those people seemed extra unreasonable today. All I wanted was a hot meal, the kids tucked in bed, maybe half an hour of brainless TV before crashing. Just a normal night. But the dinner I'd left warming was still sitting on the counter, barely touched, and the kids were playing way past bedtime. I could hear her laughter coming from upstairs. She was on the phone, probably with one of her artsy friends. It wasn't even a special occasion, just another random night when I came home to a cold house and ignored food. That's when it started, that ache in my chest. I'd always been the kind of guy who brushed things off, who kept his head down and plowed through. But lately, it felt like something was off. Like the kitchen remodel, those fancy tiles she never even complimented, or that birthday present I'd spent way too much on, only to see it tucked away in a drawer a week later. Then there was our anniversary. That stung the most. I'd planned this surprise dinner reservation at that snobby place she always hinted about. But she came home late, some excuse about a client meeting running long, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. She'd barely even apologized, just shrugged it off and asked what was for dinner. My buddy Dave pulled me aside last week, during our fishing trip. Hey man, I don't want to but I saw your wife the other day. At lunch, with some guy, he looked uncomfortable, like he expected me to go off the deep end. I just laughed, told him it was probably a client or something and changed the subject. But afterward, I couldn't shake the image. Her, laughing across a table from a dude I've never seen. Those late nights at work started happening more often, all with lame excuses. Unexpected project, or client dinner, stuff like that. Then those business trips popped up, quick overnighters to cities I couldn't place on a map. The doubt in the back of my mind grew bigger each day. I wanted to ask her straight out, but something held me back. Like I didn't want to face whatever the answer might be. The phone, man, that damn phone was glued to her hand. Texting at dinner, texting during the kids' bedtime stories, even texting in the freaking bathroom. I didn't like it, but when I mentioned it, she just rolled her eyes. It's work stuff, you know how demanding my clients can be. Whatever. Then came this Ashley person. Supposedly a new hire at her firm, some single mom struggling to make ends meet. My wife, bless her heart, felt the need to be her personal savior. I'm just mentoring her a bit, helping her out with the workload, she'd say. All well and good, except the helping out turned into late-night texts and weekend phone calls. Once, I even overheard her whispering on the porch, voice all soft and sympathetic. When I finally got the nerve to confront her about it, that's when things got weird. You're being ridiculous, she hissed. Trying to control me, just like always. It was like a switch had flipped. She made me feel bad for even questioning her, like I should be grateful she took time away from her charity work to grace me with her presence. I couldn't sleep right anymore. The worry gnawed at me like rats in the walls. Found myself snapping at the kids for stupid stuff that usually didn't even get a rise out of me. That model airplane I'd been building with my son sat in the garage, half finished, the pieces scattered like my sanity. Everything was unraveling. The other morning, I saw her texting in the car, driving the kids to school. That's what set me off. I yelled, right there in front of the kids. I'd never done that, never lost my cool like that. Her face got all hard, that icy glare she only used when she wanted me to feel small. The kids started crying in the back seat, and I knew, right then and there, that something was seriously wrong. Seriously wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. The phone calls, the late nights, the lies piling up like a stack of dirty laundry. This wasn't us, this wasn't how things were supposed to be. So, I did something I never thought I would. Found one of those shady ads in the back of some free newspaper, you know the kind, discreet investigations, results guaranteed. Sounded desperate, but I figured, hell, I already was desperate. The guy the first met with was this sleazy type, office in some rundown part of town. He looked me up and down, probably sizing up how much he could squeeze out of me. Didn't matter, I just needed answers. I showed him a picture of my wife, told him I wanted her followed. Gave him what little I could scrape together, and waited. The photos came a week later, thick manila envelope shoved under my door when I got home from work. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the damn thing. There she was, clear as day, getting into a car in some supermarket parking lot. Not her car, and the guy driving. Well, I'd be damned if it wasn't Matt. My best friend Matt. I went home, I wanted to throw up, to scream, to smash something. But I just stood there in the kitchen, the pictures spread out on the counter, like I was some character in a bad movie. When she walked in that night, humming that same stupid tune she always did when she was feeling good, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I slammed the photos down in front of her. I don't even remember what I yelled, something about lies and betrayal and Matt. Her face did that thing, the way it twists when she's cornered. First, the denial, then the anger. How dare you? And, you're spying on me, like I was the bad guy here. But I wouldn't back down this time. Finally, it all came spilling out. Ashley, Matt, the affair that had been going on for months, maybe longer. My whole world started spinning. It took everything I had not to collapse right there on our perfectly tiled kitchen floor. Turns out, their families were tight too. Soccer games, barbecues. All of it while they snuck around behind our backs. I felt sick to my stomach, everything, all those years, all those talks about friendship and trust, just a big, fat punchline. The kids, I didn't know how to tell them, how to explain that their perfect world, the one I worked so hard to build, had exploded into a million shards. My little girl kept asking where mommy was, why she wasn't singing her bedtime song anymore. My boy, usually so full of energy, just got this quiet, sad look on his face. Every night they'd sneak into my room, and we'd all pile into my bed, clinging to each other like we were on a life raft in a storm. Then there were Matt and Ashley. Seeing their faces around town was like reopening a fresh wound. I'd always thought of Ashley as family. Our kids played together for years. Now, I couldn't even look at her without seeing them together, hearing her whispers on the phone, picturing their lies. And Matt, I didn't know if I wanted to punch him or just break down sobbing in front of him. I was completely lost, never been a talker, not about big feelings. So I did something I never thought I'd do. Called my brother. We haven't been close for years, always drifted apart for one stupid reason or another. But he answered my call, and his voice sounded different. Older, I guess. Less cocky. It all came spilling out. The affair, the photos, the kids. I must have sounded half-crazed. But he just listened. For the first time in ages, I felt like someone was actually on my side. He told me to bring the kids and come stay at his place. A small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was enough. My in-laws, now that was a whole other mess. I guess I should have expected it, but they turned on me. Took their precious daughter's side, even after the proof, even with the kids crying and hurting. Her dad even threatened me. Said I'd never see my kids again if I took this any further. My world was collapsing, and the people who were supposed to protect her, defended her. Like the betrayal wasn't bad enough. It was my brother who finally talked some sense into me. Get yourself a lawyer, he said, and not some wishy-washy one. Get yourself a shark. I'd never been the confrontational type, always tried to make peace, keep things smooth. But sitting in my brother's cramped apartment, my kids sleeping on the worn-out sofa, something inside me snapped. We found this lawyer, a real sharp-dressed woman with eyes like steel. She didn't flinch when I told her the whole story, just took notes, that brow of hers furrowed. Then came the bombshell. Turns out a lawyer helps with more than just the divorce stuff. They can dig. Every bank statement, every old credit card bill, it was all laid out under those harsh fluorescent lights in her office. The numbers didn't lie, designer clothes, fancy hotels in cities I'd never heard of. All while I was counting pennies to make sure the kids had new shoes for school. Her so-called art career was an excuse, a cover for this double life she'd built. Then came the whispers, started like background noise you try to ignore, then got louder, impossible to escape. People, friends I thought I could count on, suddenly acting different. Some offered awkward condolences, others avoided me altogether. The worst were the parents at the kids' school, used to be all friendly chats at pickup. Now, those smiles seemed strained, a mix of pity and, I knew there was something off, behind their eyes. Every day felt like a battle. In court, with the lawyers arguing over every plate or picture frame, like our lives were just items on a list. In town, feeling the judgment of strangers. At home. Well, my brother's place wasn't a home, not really. Just a way station, a temporary shelter. But something shifted during those meetings with the lawyer, seeing the proof of it all in black and white. I wasn't just the sad, betrayed husband anymore. I was angry, damn angry, and that anger, it was fuel. I'd always been the nice guy, but enough was enough. It was time to fight back for what was rightfully mine, for the kids' sake, for my own sanity. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, figuring it was some telemarketer or another lawyer looking for a scrap of this mess. But something made me hesitate. I swiped to answer. Hello? I said, voice hoarse from exhaustion. As this, is your name, husband's name? A woman's voice, timid and familiar, but I couldn't place it. Yeah, who's this? That's when it hit me. Ashley? I said, the name tasting like bitter acid in my mouth. Turns out, life likes a sick joke. After everything, she was the one who reached out. Said she saw my address listed in the court filings, wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Figured a bit more pain at this point wouldn't kill me. We met at a dingy little coffee shop on the edge of town. She looked different, not the glamorous, put-together Ashley I remembered. This version was pale, eyes red-rimmed, a slump in her shoulders that mirrored my own. Turns out, Matt wasn't the prize she expected either. We talked, awkwardly at first, then the words poured out like we were both desperate to make sense of it all. The lies, the years of deception. She told me things about my wife, things about Matt, that made me want to be sick. And then she apologized, not for what she'd done, but for being part of hurting me, of hurting the kids. Even in mess of her own making, there was a flicker of decency in her. The kids, they're the hardest part. My little boy keeps drawing pictures of our family, the four of us together and smiling. My daughter keeps asking for mommy to read her favorite story, the one about the princess. I'd choke out some excuse, make up promises I can't keep, and hope they're still young enough to believe me. How do you explain the unexplainable to innocent eyes? Last night, after the kids finally slept, I did something I swore I'd never do. I went into the garage and pulled a bottle out from the back of the tool cupboard. I never was a big drinker, a beer after mowing the lawn kind of guy, but lately, I just wanted to feel numb. I sat there on the floor, staring at the framed wedding photo propped up against a half-built workbench. All those promises, that beaming smile, such a damn lie. The rage bubbled up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. I let out a scream, a primal sound I didn't know I was capable of, and hurled the picture against the wall. The shattering glass was like ice water to the face. I collapsed on the floor right there, and I cried. Cried like I haven't since I was a little kid, sobbed until I had nothing left, until all that remained was a cold emptiness. Somewhere, in the back of my mind, was the thought I should clean it up, that the kids shouldn't see. But all I felt in that moment was bone-deep exhaustion and a question, was I ever good enough anyway? Character assassination, that's what my lawyer called it. Each week in court, it was a new lie. I was abusive, neglectful, mentally unstable. The kind of accusations that make a good man doubt himself for just a second. Then I'd look at my kids, their faces pale and drawn, and the rage would blaze white-hot in me again. She'd turned them into pawns in this vicious game. Coached them, I think. Their once bright eyes that used to light up when they saw me were now weary, filled with questions I couldn't answer, accusations I couldn't fathom. Every visit had a new sting, a new accusation, tearing me apart piece by piece. Funny thing happened though. My sister, who'd always been quiet, barely a voice in our family, changed right before my eyes. She wouldn't stand for it. Started dropping by every morning to help with the kids, her no-nonsense voice cutting through the chaos. Eat your breakfast, she'd tell them, not asking, but not mean either. At night, she'd put on her glasses and go to war with my lawyer, scouring the paperwork with a look that could make a grown man squirm. The trial, it was hell. Having to recount the worst moments of my life for a room full of strangers. Seeing her sitting there, not even looking ashamed, and that loser mad shifting in his seat like a cornered rat. The dirt the lawyers dug up, the proof that her fancy trips were all paid for by my sweat and sacrifice. Every word was like a punch to the gut, but somewhere in the back of my mind, it solidified something. I wasn't gonna go under without a fight, not for my kids, not for myself. We didn't get everything we wanted. Judge seemed to think splitting things down the middle was fair. Money from the house sale would be tied up forever, and worse, she'd still get visitation. But damn it, I got primary custody. Restrictions put on Nat and her spending spree? The judge didn't take kindly to that, not at all. Leaving the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious, but something close to it. The kids were little less wary, my sister actually hugged me, and the sky above didn't seem so oppressive anymore. Now it's just us. Our perfect house is full of half-finished projects and more dust bunnies than you'd believe. But washing a load of dishes, it's different somehow. It's my mess to clean, my kids to feed. This bottle's not over. Far from it. But there's a flicker inside me, a stubborn refusal to lose